Hello, and welcome to the 12 Days of Tradmus. If you're new around here, my name is Kit, and Tradmus is a series I do in December where I talk about the harmful beliefs and ideas promoted by certain influencers, content creators, and so on. Basically, my normal content, but more of it and with a festive flair. And on the fourth day of Tradmus, we're discussing female submission as explained by Jasmyne Theodora. Before we get into it, I would like to note that I don't know Jasmine, and these are my thoughts and opinions on the content she puts out for public consumption. That being said, thank you for clicking on this video, and I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. Jasmyne Theodora is a YouTuber with over 130,000 subscribers. It looks like she began her channel in 2021, and per the About page, she's recovering the art of the feminine and lost female education. YouTube suggested her on being a submissive wife video to me some months ago, and well, I am burying the lead, but we all know how I feel about submission. And since this video might attract some new viewers, I want to note that what you do in your home is your business, and you do not need to justify yourself to strangers. But when people with platforms encourage women to submit, that's when I bring out the microphone and ring light. Recently-ish, Jasmine posted about, paraphrasing, being nervous now whenever she uploads a new video because it attracts attention. And that made me doubt doing this video because, you know, at first glance, she does seem like a sweet person who doesn't mean any harm. And then I remembered, and some of you all might as well because I shared this on my tab, that this was the first post I saw from her. In the drawing, there is a man apparently representing modern-day Western women having sex, and then a butterfly to represent pregnancy, and then the question, is this a violation of my human rights? Jasmine's commentary is a laughing emoji, and this is too good not to share. And suddenly, my sympathy flew out the window. This is not funny, but per Jasmine, this was just too good not to share. She doesn't seem to get it, but I'll explain. Pregnancy itself is not a violation of human rights, but being forced to remain pregnant against your will is. And as the cherry on top, 2 months after that, she wrote this post about how children don't only deserve loving parents, they deserve parents who enjoy being parents. How exactly does she think that would work in her world where abortion isn't legal? She's also posted a few more things that, well, I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, but I have a tendency of assuming people are better than they are until they prove otherwise. For some reason, Jasmine posted a story about a forum on a hospital website, and she seems quite stricken by the fact that you can declare your gender identity, sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, and just, what is the problem? Fill out what you're comfortable filling out and go. It's not a big deal. And then, of course, there are people asking her questions, and is wearing a condom during sex wrong as a Christian? Per Jasmine, probably, but don't decide that for yourself. Check in with your spiritual father. Is birth control a sin? Hormonal, yes. Condoms, probably. But again, don't decide that for yourself. Check with your spiritual father. And remember that no matter what you do, God's will for your family will prevail over your own. And finally, how to be a man's peace. What came to Jasmine's mind was not trying to change him, which I agree with. Forgive swiftly, which I'm not so sure about, but okay. And then it gets weird. Focus on his good side, okay, but write his good traits down and admire them consistently? What? And then demonstrate childlike trust in his abilities and leadership. And I am just floored. I am floored. She also shared a post from Suzanne Venker about how it was men, not feminists, that liberated women, and they seemed to think women's liberation was about housework, not basic human rights. Per Suzanne, the folks to whom women are truly indebted are inventors such as Thomas Edison, electric lights, Elias Howe, the sewing machine, Clarence Birdseye, the process for frozen foods, and Henry Ford, the automobile. And I'm a bit curious, are men not indebted to those inventors as well? Why is it just women? Suzanne also credits men with the inventions of washing machines, dryers, dishwashers, and vacuum cleaners, as well as the birth control pill and the internet. And in her eagerness to portray men as the creators of everything good and worthwhile, Suzanne forgot that it was actually a woman who invented the dishwasher and women who played a large part in creating the internet. They also have apparently forgotten that for generations, women weren't educated, which actually makes it even more impressive that there were women who overcame that and managed to create and invent anyway. And then people like Suzanne and Jasmine come along and brush off their inventions like they were nothing, while plainly showing that if a man had done it, then they would consider it worthwhile. Nice. Anyway, all that aside, we're actually here to watch her video on being a submissive wife. Per Jasmine, people get offended by gender roles because we subconsciously assign more value to being a leader and, well, no. I assign value to being a person with all the complexities that entails and not being told, you're a woman, therefore you do this. Even if I was told that as a woman I must be the leader, I would still object. No one should submit to another human, especially not in relationships, and especially not on the basis of their sex. Anyway, Jasmine calls for keeping an open mind and being respectful, and yes, please do be respectful, and please don't call this a kink. These people are serious. I know submission is a kink for some, but these folks really do believe that women will account to God on whether or not she was submissive to her husband. We open with Jasmine reading some comments from her last submission video, and she's here to clear up the misconceptions. And the first thing she says is that, though this is controversial, most people still prescribe to gender roles, and her example is if, upon leaving the you in the situation is a woman, home with your husband, you were confronted by a mugger with a knife. How would you feel if your husband hid behind you? The woman she was apparently talking to said that wasn't a fair question because that kind of situation wouldn't happen anyway, which Jasmine calls naive. And this is a great example of how these traditional beliefs harm men as well as women. Why is it expected that a man puts his life on the line for his partner, but a woman isn't expected to do the same? As for naivete, where is Jasmine living that she thinks she's in constant mortal danger? It hasn't escaped my notice that this is supposed to be a trade-off. You submit to a man, so he protects you from other men, and I sense a racket. A protection racket, if you will. Back to Jasmine. She asked the question again, and the woman said she would have to think about it, and Jasmine said she stopped asking because she, of course, knew what the woman was thinking, even if she didn't want to admit it, because it would crumble her entire worldview. Sure. Here's my answer. If I was with a man and he hid behind me when we were attacked, I would think he didn't care about me. And I would think a man would feel the same way. You shouldn't be willing to sacrifice someone you claim to care about to ensure your own safety. And honestly, I would think a mugger would be more inclined to approach a person on their own instead of a couple. And also, if he's going to stab one of you, why would he stop at just one? They also seem to assume their husbands would be able to subdue all threats, and what if he doesn't? Does that make him less of a man? Again, harmful, but per Jasmine, this goes to show that people who deny gender roles deny reality. Maybe I misheard.
What this goes to show is that oftentimes the people who deny the validity within gender roles deny reality.
Per Jasmine, the woman essentially denied that danger exists in this world, and no, she didn't. Obviously, your chances of being the victim of a crime differs based on things like your location, but the average couple isn't likely to be confronted at their doorstep by a mugger with a knife. Also per Jasmine, the woman also denied that men are physically stronger and she wouldn't be able to stand a chance against a male mugger with a knife, and again, no, she didn't. The question wasn't, who do you think is more likely to take down a mugger? The question was how the woman would feel if her husband hid behind her in a dangerous situation. This is so disingenuous. Anyway.
She denied that she would be more attracted to her husband if he were to take on the role of the protector.
And again, no, she didn't. For someone who requests everyone else to keep an open mind, Jasmine sure is happy to pretend she can read someone else's mind. Has it occurred to her that not every woman is like her? I feel pretty safe saying that most people don't want someone they care about to put themselves in harm's way, even if it's to save themselves. The smart thing to do is not to confront, that way the man and the woman in this scenario can walk away unharmed. And if you find yourself losing attraction to your husband because you think he should have tackled the mugger or whatever, that reflects on you, not him.
I know that if an attacker were to confront my husband and my husband would probably shove me to the side and attack the mugger himself. But if I were to get in the way of the attacker, if I were to deludedly try to protect my husband, the mugger would probably see that as a good opportunity to attack, and it would put both my husband and I in more danger.
No one should be attacking the mugger. That is how people get killed. This is dangerous. Please don't encourage women to think that their husbands should be attacking someone who tries to attack them. Yes, defend yourself, but you have to be smart about it, and not every situation calls for an attack, especially when weapons are involved. I don't know Jasmine's life story, but This just screams sheltered upbringing. People who have never been in dangerous situations think about heroics, while people who have think about how to safely get out of the situation. And that safely usually doesn't involve attacking someone. Anyway, Jasmyne says this video isn't going to be her judging or shaming people for not taking on these roles. Many of us have just been curious about her approach to submission, and, well, all of my regular viewers know I'm always curious. First, Jasmyne gives an overview of submission, and she says that the picture of submission so often painted by people is not what Christians practice, and submission is not Christian women being thankless maids and sex objects who completely lack a backbone, always hold their tongue, and should never think to give their husbands their opinions or concerns. Jasmyne adds that submission is a ubiquitous occurrence for everyone. We submit to our parents, teachers, bosses, the law. What was it Louise said? It's not submission if you agree? Anyway, for some reason, people have an issue with a wife following her husband's lead, and yes, I do. Please see my submission playlist for more info. I'm still holding out hope that Jasmyne won't be as bad, but the intro wasn't promising, and right after that...
Submission occurs in every relationship, as you cannot have a harmonious relationship with two leaders. There is always going to be a more masculine partner and a more feminine partner in a relationship due to polarity.
The submission pushers are very interesting. They seem to think men and women are utterly incapable of having rational conversations and instead need these rules about how men lead and women submit, otherwise we would never be able to get along. And we can't have too much in common or be too similar, otherwise the polarity would be thrown off, and good heavens, what would we do then? I joke, but seriously, this is actually not too dissimilar from other women must submit creators. I am curious though as to why it's always women who must submit. Let's say I believe that masculine and feminine polarity is important. Why is submission feminine? I trust I'll get my answer eventually, but for now...
We have a lot to straighten out regarding the relationships between men and women in the modern world. They are utterly warped and demented out of shape. I think regardless of which side of the coin you're on, we can agree on that.
No, I don't agree that modern relationships are demented. I would like an example of what she means by this, but since I'm not going to get one, I would like to know what differentiates modern relationships from times past and how they, because Jasmyne is not the only one who says this, figure relationships were better in the past. Unsurprisingly, Jasmyne trots out the tired line that treating men and women as if we're virtually interchangeable dishonors both sexes, and no one is trying to say that men and women are interchangeable. In fact, I would say the closest we get to that are those who seem to believe that so long as they're performing their gender roles, any man and any woman can have a successful marriage. The people involved don't matter so long as they're performing their gender roles. Anyway, Jasmyne says there's a lot of resentment between men and women these days, and says that things like MGTOW and the book I Hate Men by Pauline Harmange are actually popular, and how did we get here?
I think a big reason actually why we're here is because we have denied the validity within gender roles. Gender roles create an environment in which the glorious differences between men and women are honored. The closest we can get to true harmony between men and women is through the acknowledgement, celebration, and embodiment of our respective differences, not the erasing of them.
So if Pauline Harmange had just accepted her gender role, she wouldn't have written that book because she just would have accepted things are how they are? This strikes me as rather shallow, but moving on. Jasmyne says men and women are made in the image of God, so we're equal in value and worth, but different in design. Why does this sound so familiar? Anyway, did you know that men and women are intrinsically different? This always makes me laugh because, okay, men and women are so different, and yet we're expected to live intimately with one another for decades. This is what happens when someone thinks men and women can't be friends. They end up othering the opposite sex. Anyway, Jasmyne says that a submissive wife creates greater relationship harmony because she is acknowledging that her husband is naturally drawn toward leadership, and there is a refreshing quality in the simplicity of embodying the masculine and feminine gender roles, which are complementary opposites that enhance each other and give one another the freedom to fully be themselves. Except telling men they have to be one way and women they have to be another isn't allowing anyone to fully be themselves. And
feminine submission is actually feminine liberation, the freedom to fully embrace your feminine nature.
So there you have it. Submitting to the will of someone else is liberation. Anyway.
personally, I find submission to be incredibly liberating. To follow the lead of my husband instead of having the burden of being the leader is very liberating to me.
I think I've mentioned this in other videos, but sometimes it really sounds like these submissive wives just don't want to deal with being adults. And I don't understand this whole someone has to be the leader. You're two adults building a life together. Why wouldn't you consider each other partners? Anyway, Jasmyne tells us that a well-integrated man will be well aware that submission is a sacred act not to be exploited, which is always my point, that if you believe you must be submissive, that's easily exploited and power corrupts. If you tell a man he's the leader and his wife must be submissive because he's a man and she's a woman and that's how God ordained it, I can see how that could go to a man's head, and unfortunately, there is no shortage of people willing to use the Bible to justify horrible things. Back to Jasmyne.
I completely understand the fear of submission that so many women hold. Surrendering yourself to the will of another is scary, but it really is the path for a fulfilling, happy marriage.
That didn't really reassure me. Granted, I'm already not keen on submission, but someone telling me, yeah, it's scary, but it will be fulfilling, that's just not convincing. Anyway, we move on to biblical submission, and Jasmyne says there's a big difference between God-ordained submission and the myopic, traditional approach to submission, which was a surprise to hear, but I'm not optimistic. And listening a little more reveals that, yes, it's as I expected. Jasmyne ultimately submits to her husband because that's what God designed marriage to be, and Adam's role, even before the fall, was to be the leader and protector, and I am a bit curious as to what he was protecting Eve from before the fall. Anyway, submission isn't the result of sin. Sin is what causes women to resent this marital structure, and sin is what causes men to be less than perfect. And now, the difference between biblical and trad submission.
The difference between biblical submission and traditional or trad submission is that within traditional submission, there's a lot of talk as to whether or not the husband is worthy of submission in the first place. And this does have a place in the discussion. I think a husband should always be trying to be a better leader, a better man. Of course, we're not called to submit to abuse or that which is sinful, but in a godly marriage, submission is not wholly conditional. Submission is not given to a husband as a reward. It is not earned by a husband who leads and loves his family as he ought to. It is rather given freely out of obedience to God. It is covenantal. In fact, a wife is called to submit to her husband even when he is not being a mature follower of Christ.
But that's literally what they all say. Trad or biblical, no matter what, you are to submit. It doesn't matter if your husband is behaving as he ought, you're still to submit. Some do throw in that you don't have to submit to abuse or sin, but a lot just ignore it or brush it off as too rare to bother mentioning. I don't know what trad folks Jasmyne has come across, but none I've seen say you only submit if your husband is doing X, Y, and Z. Anyway, Jasmyne says we should all choose our husbands wisely, but even the best of men have wives who struggle to submit because of sin. Jasmyne gives a seemingly random story about how even she has gotten upset when her husband guided her to the inside of the sidewalk, and I think I know where she's going.
I know people say that Christianity perpetuates female inferiority and is hyperfixated on how men are basically worshipped and they can do whatever they want. And meanwhile, John Chrysostom, an early church father, said you should be willing to be cut into 10,000 pieces for your wife. A man should be willing to give himself up for his wife as Christ gave himself up for the church. So God's design for marriage actually is designed to keep you as the wife safe. Husbands are called to love their wives self-sacrificially.
Not exactly where I thought she was going, but close enough. That's a pretty idea, very romantic, but as has been noted before, submission is something done daily for your entire life. How often is a man cut into 10,000 pieces for his wife? How likely is it that he will have to die for her? I can see this working on my teenage self. How romantic. I submit to him and he would do anything for me. He'll protect me and keep me safe, and that concerns me. That's just not how the world works, and sometimes even those that are supposed to protect you are those you need protection from. And we always go back to this.
If you are waiting for your husband to change before you submit to him, you've missed the entire point of submission. There is a misconception that submission only works for easy marriages, but that it's wholly inapplicable for the difficult ones.
So this video was actually going to be for the first day of Tradmas, but I didn't want to do another female submission explained video so soon after the Milena one, and I didn't even know they would be so similar. Anyway, Jasmyne informs us that God has chosen this marital structure in spite of sin, and what an interesting thing to say. An omnipotent deity chose a structure easy to abuse that has women submitting to men, but we're not supposed to think that Christianity treats women as inferior.
Submission ultimately is not about control, it's about trust. It's a consensual dynamic. I willingly, intentionally, and happily submit to my husband. He does not force me to submit to his decision making.
A few minutes ago, she said that you're not to wait until your husband is perfect to submit and that this is God ordained, and then she says this is her choice. So which is it? She isn't bound by secular law to submit, but if she thinks the Bible is telling her she has to and she believes it, is that really a choice? No, she won't go to jail for not submitting, but if she thinks she'll have to account to God for not submitting to her husband, again, is that really a choice? Also,
submission really is an investment in the good of your marriage. God ordained to use obedience of wives to move the hearts of their husbands.
Ah yes, win him without a word always pops up eventually. I do love the subtle guilt trip. If you don't submit, you'll cause your husband to sin, and it will be your fault if your marriage falls apart. Anyway, Jasmyne submits because God's design has earthly relationships mirroring divine reality, and I bet that's a very cloudy mirror. From here we go to my favorite part, how submission looks in practice and what happens when they disagree. Jasmyne starts off saying that if you marry a man you love and have a lot in common with, submission would feel like something you don't have to think about, but eventually there will be a disagreement, and biblically, you have to submit. She does add that you're not to submit to sin or abuse, and I'm glad she made note of that again, but when you tell women they have to submit, husbands are the leader, women are to submit in all things, men aren't Jesus, and you're to submit even if he's not doing what he should, how are they to know what is too far? And even if they know their husband is doing something unbiblical, if they were raised to be a submissive wife, would they be willing to risk what they know for the unknown? How would they support themselves, their kids? Where would they go? It's very easy to sit there and say, the Bible calls you to submit even when your husband isn't perfect, and he's to love you even when you aren't perfect, but reality is so messy, and there is no way these submissive wives don't know that. They have the internet. Back to Jasmyne.
Does this mean he never decides to do what I'd like to do? No, he often does actually. Oftentimes he'll make a suggestion, then I'll make a suggestion, and he actually thinks my suggestion is better, and he decides for us to do what I suggested.
That's great, but that doesn't detract from the fact that he gets to make that decision based on his sex. And not only that decision, but all the decisions. There is no point in which Jasmyne is the one who gets final say.
But of course, there are times when we vehemently disagree on something and he stands firm on what he thinks we should do. And in those moments, it is really difficult to submit to him.
Case in point, Jasmyne says it's difficult partly because they haven't been married very long and she doesn't have much experience yet with submission, and partly because of sin. And sometimes she hasn't submitted and has done what she wanted to do.
And this always causes immense disharmony between us. And I always end up repenting of it, regretting being stubborn, and I go back to him and apologize and try to do better.
Another thing with submission, the husband is always assumed to be in the right. And if they were an average couple, they could each do their own thing without having to worry about if the wife is submitting to the husband, and then the following could be avoided.
I'm not a very social person, and I sometimes want to just leave right after the liturgy, but he wants to stay and have some coffee and chat with people. And I ask him if we could please just leave because I'm tired or because I just really don't feel like staying and talking to people. But he stands firm on his decision for us to stay and talk to people.
Of course, if they discussed it like partners, they could go to church separately, or if it's really important for him that his wife be there, trade off Sundays. One Sunday they leave after liturgy, the next they stay. After all, if a husband is to love his wife like Christ loved the church, he should think of her comfort, right?
And there was a time I was so stubborn and probably hormonal because of the pregnancy that I just walked out of the church anyways. And I went to the car knowing that he would not stay in church without me. And it was very manipulative of me.
Could have been avoided if they had just talked like adults, but anyway.
And I regretted it and repented of it soon after and resolved to do better. And now I always agree to stay and talk to people at church. And you know what? I have never regretted doing that. I've honestly never once subsequently regretted submitting to my husband, even when I disagreed with him on something, even if it was difficult at the moment. He has proven to be a wonderful leader and decision maker, and I know he loves me deeply and always takes me into full consideration.
You just told us a story where you weren't a consideration at all. But the story is always the same. The woman resists submission, it's difficult, but she never regrets it. The husbands of influencers and content creators are always so great at leading, though honestly, I doubt they would tell us otherwise. And in reality, they're just treating women like children who don't know their own mind and need an adult to guide them into what they really want, what would really be the best for them. And
he feels respected and heard, and I feel always loved and considered.
Of course he feels heard and respected. You disregarded what you wanted to do what he wanted. And I'm not really sure how she felt loved and considered, because in that story there was no talk of any discussion. It was just, he likes to do this, I don't, so one time I just walked out and I regretted it, so I repented, and now I do what he wants. Where is the love? Where is the consideration? Anyway, Jasmyne says that she always regrets when she doesn't submit, and she witnesses the disharmony it creates. So, to be clear, the man has the final say and women are to submit, and women are also responsible for maintaining the harmony in the relationship by submitting. What is the man's contribution to relationship harmony? Jasmyne does not tell us this, but she does tell us about a realization she had.
This has led me to recognize that submission is not a manifestation of weakness. Rather, it is a manifestation of wisdom. Submitting when you're not in agreement does take a lot of humility, sacrifice, and selflessness.
They really do be claiming submission is everything it isn't. Submission is freedom, submission is liberation, submission is wisdom. No, just going along with what your husband says because he's a man and you're a woman and women are to submit is not, in fact, wisdom. Jasmyne goes on to tell us that she married partly because she trusted his leadership, and she has to remember that, even when she doesn't agree with him, he still loves her as his own flesh, so she has to continue to trust him in his decision-making. And per Jasmyne, submission isn't only for disagreements. It's an ever-present attitude of deference and respect. It's thoughtfully listening to and taking an interest in what he has to say, noticing his subtle preferences and honoring them. It's speaking about him as though he's in the room, and finally, it's the joy you respond to him with. To be honest, it sounds to me like the woman is to make her husband her whole world, and, well, Jasmyne unintentionally confirms that for me.
Within your marriage, there's not always a very certain request to submit to. Most of the time, submission simply looks like a subtle, ever-present sense of respect for your husband, quietly doing things the way he enjoys them to be done, honoring him with your daily decisions. And when you consistently cultivate this spirit of honor for your husband in your day-to-day life, submission in the bigger issues becomes much, much easier.
Translation. When you absorb yourself into catering to your husband, it's easier to disregard what you would want or even think. And all my hopes have evaporated, though I don't know why I had any in the first place. Anyway, Jasmyne says that if you as a woman never want your husband to push back or disagree with you on anything, you're actually a fan of submission. And there is a big difference between liking it when you agree on things and expecting or demanding it. You are essentially expecting and demanding that a person will cater to you and your wants. The difference here is that when men make that demand, it's biblical and women should do it because, again, biblical. And then Jasmyne mercilessly dashes my hopes again.
And what baffles me is that women who think that submitting to your husband is oppressive, regressive, etc., will have no problem submitting to their male boss at work or submitting to the decisions of the president.
Submitting to the decisions of the president? You mean the law? I would love to know what laws Jasmyne doesn't want to submit to, but anyway, as always, I enjoy the assumption that the boss is a man. But in this section, Jasmyne is trying to conflate work and marriage, and you really can't compare the two. Per Jasmyne, though her husband has the final say, he values her opinion, whereas bosses just want you to do whatever you're asked. And she thinks you could argue that submission at work would take more humility because most of the time you can't or won't even think of disagreeing with your boss, and this just doesn't work. Employment and marriage are two very different things, and I would like to add that there are employers who do want and value input from their employees. That being said, most people plan to be with their partner for the rest of their lives. But most people do not plan to be with an employer that long. Most people are building a life with their partner. The employer is incidental to that. This comparison is so strange to me, and it's like she got her ideas about work from TV. Anyway, from here we go to submission and attraction, and Jasmyne tells us that one fruit of submission she loves is how it cultivates polarity in her marriage, and polarity is essential. Wondering what she's talking about? Me too.
As a woman, I'm very much attracted to a masculine, take charge, decisive, tough, unyielding man. And as a man, my husband is attracted to a feminine, cooperative, flexible, gentle, soft woman. And us taking steps to help nurture this dichotomy paves way for a deep sense of attraction towards each other.
Has it occurred to her that this isn't a man and a woman thing, it's a Jasmine and her husband thing? Not all men are attracted to the same thing, not all women are attracted to the same thing. Anyway, Jasmine says that she might feel the need to be masculine if her husband doesn't properly fulfill the masculine role, and we are sounding a bit manosphere in here. It really has infected everything. Apparently, the threat of his wife becoming masculine encourages him to properly and virtuously fulfill his masculine role, and
if he wants me to be a fully cooperative follower,
is this a marriage or a cult? Good grief. Anyway, men, do you want that fully cooperative follower? Well, you need to try your best to be a well-intentioned, virtuous, decisive leader. Otherwise, she's going to wish she was the leader, and you don't want that. You do want attraction though, so let's hear some more about that.
I have never been as attracted to a man whatsoever, and I know this is hugely due to us actively and intentionally cultivating polarity. In my past relationships, before I knew how important the respective masculine and feminine roles are, I wondered why it bothered me when the guy I was with was too nice, because why wouldn't I want a really nice guy? It's because ultimately he lacked the masculinity I was unknowingly craving so much. Being nice literally means to be pleasing, agreeable, and cooperative. Agreeability and cooperation both being feminine traits. And the men I was with were so often agreeable and cooperative to a fault.
Please just stop. This is so dangerous. Not only for women thinking that a man being agreeable means he's feminine, but also for any men getting a hold of this and thinking, aha, women want toxic men, I knew it. And why yes, I am currently being argued with about this. There is nothing wrong with a man being nice, polite, agreeable, as Jasmine says. The issue is when that's all you are. Either you are being fake and thinking it will get you a reward, or you are not being honest for whatever reason. I have dated men that always deferred to me, and I didn't like it. Not because I wanted a masculine man to tell me what's what, but because I felt like I wasn't getting to know them.
And I unknowingly really wanted an unyielding, strong-willed, tough, honestly stern man.
That's great, but I wish she would recognize that that's her preference. Her, Jasmine. Not women as a whole. And from here we go to sexual submission, and apparently Jasmine was looking at submission videos on YouTube to see what her video would be up against, and most of the results were apparently about BDSM, and this was her takeaway.
And then what that video reminded me of is how the same people who think that having your husband lead your family in life is oppressive and sad will probably be completely fine with slavish female submission when it comes to sex, and will say that people should not kink shame. But for some reason, me taking on the role of the submissive wife in life is a dangerous regressive concept.
So it is a kink then? I'm just being annoying. I know it's not. Seriously though, can she not tell the difference between a kink, and by the way, anyone can be a submissive in the kink world, it's not just for women, and telling women, just women, they need to be submissive to their husband in everything and will have to account for it before God? Per Jasmine, this emphasizes our culture's focus on the flesh instead of the spirit, because submitting to your husband as his wife and not just his sexual mate makes your marriage more spiritual and more holy. And again, can she really not tell the difference? She did look at the comments on one of the videos, and this was what she got from it.
And I think these women just wanted to be submissive to a man, but the kink community was the only community that they could find outside of Christian circles that would affirm this desire. So they think of this very natural desire as kinky, even though it's not kinky, it's actually very vanilla, it's normal.
I'm guessing she's not going to talk about submissive men because that would ruin the conclusion she drew here.
I swear, if I simply said that me following my husband's lead is a kink, no progressive would say anything. They'd say, you go girl, follow your daddy. But me following him because it's God ordained is what's oppressive and abusive.
I don't think being a submissive wife means you're automatically in an abusive relationship, but I do think they are at higher risk for becoming so. And given that being a submissive wife tends to mean lots of kids and no paid employment, that also means it would be harder to leave an abusive situation. But the big difference between a kink sub and a religious sub is, well, I'm not convinced she doesn't understand the difference, but here is a comment from one of my viewers on my Female Submission Explained by Melena Ciciotti video. At least with my kind of submission, we're aware that it's all a silly roleplay at the end of the day, and I do stress that if either my husband or I were unhappy with it, or feeling like it was a chore or a burden to keep doing, we would stop. I think that sums it up pretty well. Folks with a submission kink don't believe they're following some divine mandate. So if it's not working for them, they can stop without feeling like they failed in their gender role or having to fear God's wrath. I am disappointed that Jasmine turned out to be so disingenuous. If you want to be a submissive wife, fine, but don't do this.
I find it also strange that the vast majority of women are sexually submissive and want a take-charge man in the bedroom, but people don't find this to be a strong indicator of a woman's natural predisposition to be submissive to her mate.
I find it also strange that a Christian woman is discussing other women's sexual preferences, but here we are. She concludes that the kink community has embraced this logical conclusion with what's called service submission, but most don't connect the dots, and that's because there's no dots to connect. Doing something occasionally because it does something for you does not mean it's something you want to be doing 24/7 for the rest of your life, lest you be damned. Also, is Jasmine sure she really wants to tie her God-ordained submission to kink? Or is she trying to argue that it's biological? I'm unimpressed either way, but we're at the last 2 minutes of her video now, and she's going to talk about submission and abuse, and this is not great. Editing Kit jumping in to note that what follows will sound familiar because it is familiar. Last year, I did a video on Issa Ryan's submission and abuse rant, and the following are from Issa, though Jasmine did some light editing. I can't emphasize this enough. Women get abused by abusive men, not by Holy Spirit breathed advice for Christian wives. Women like me are perfectly qualified to share Bible verses regarding submission to encourage women who are in marriages that are not abusive. We need more Jesus and less excuses to disregard him and his word. Jasmine follows Issa, now a homemaker's manifesto, so small world.
And I cannot emphasize this enough. Women get abused by pathetic, weak, toxic men, not by Holy Spirit breathed advice for Christian wives.
That sounds so familiar, but none of these women know who's listening to this advice, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone who is married to an abusive man is listening to Win Him Without a Word and God ordained women to be submissive in marriage and thinks that will be what turns her husband into a good man. It might look easy, but being an influencer actually comes with a lot of responsibility, at least if you have a conscience.
And women like me are perfectly qualified to share Bible verses regarding submission to encourage women who are in marriages that are not abusive.
I'm pretty sure a Homemaker's Manifesto said the exact same thing last year. And my response remains the same. What you are preaching is dangerous, because giving all the power to one person in a relationship is dangerous. And what's even worse is raising children in that dynamic, so that's all they know. That makes them even less equipped to realize unsafe relationships and even more at the mercy of their spouse. Jasmine talks about how men are called to love their wives, and then
also, having a gentle and quiet spirit does not preclude having a backbone. God wants us to stand firmly upon his word and not to budge one little iota. If your husband is being an abusive tyrant, you're not supposed to just stand there and take it whatsoever.
I'm glad she said that, but Jasmine doesn't exist in a bubble. There are plenty of women preaching submission who either outright ignore abuse or who have a list so long of what women are to do or not to do that how is a woman trying so hard to be a good Christian wife to know when she's okay to speak up and she's not just being contentious?
A godly leader will admit when he's wrong. He'll value your input. He will put your needs above his own. He leads self-sacrificially as Christ led the church.
This is good. A lot of these women just focus on wives under the I'm not permitted to speak to men because I'm a woman excuse, which I would think would make it difficult for a woman to know when her husband is crossing the line from head of house, exercising his rights, to abusive. So this is good, but then
following your husband's lead will encourage him to actually be a better man if he loves you. It's not at all meant to cultivate a sense of tyranny.
Great. You just told a woman that if her husband doesn't love her or is abusive, she just didn't follow enough. Maybe she needs to submit more. And if you're thinking, geez, Kit, it's like you'll never agree with anyone who teaches submission, you're right. I can see the dangers more clearly than I can articulate, and I've known naturally submissive people who were treated horribly by their partners, because submission doesn't inspire protection. Also, Jasmine finished her video saying that submission is an intentional choice she's made in a consensual dynamic, And then,
and me bolstering his role as my authority and protector helps to keep me safe, actually.
She finishes the video saying we need more God and less excuses to disregard him and his word, so I guess we're not going to get an explanation for how bolstering her husband's role as her authority and protector helps keep her safe. I admit I was taken in. Even after seeing the things she shared on Instagram, I kept thinking that Jasmyne couldn't be that bad. But honestly, the more I see of submission, the more it seems to me that the husband is built up as the Jesus of the house, all the benefits and none of the responsibilities, and the woman is expected to sacrifice herself for her family. And more honesty, I think the women going online and talking about submission are actually enjoying themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of them have a large audience, and though I do think the influencers preaching submission have the self-esteem and resources to leave abusive situations, I worry about their audience. There are a lot of people out there looking for answers, and this, well, if I submit, maybe he'll stop drinking, he'll stop hitting me. If I'm a good Christian wife, he'll come to Jesus and be the man I know he can be very seductive. And win him without a word plays into that. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Because it would crumble